Hello, fellow detectives. Welcome to Unlocked, the official podcast for all things Nancy Drew by Her Interactive. I'm your host, Tammy Tuckey, and this week we welcome the owner of NancyDrewSleuth.com, Jennifer Fisher, to the show. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Well, when I was looking at the website, I was just kind of fangirling because, I didn't know that there was so much more Nancy Drew than meets the eye because I grew up with the games first and that turned me onto the books. So your website's amazing. So first, before we begin our conversation, I really want to ask our listeners to pause this interview and please check out Jennifer's website at NancyDrewSleuth.com. You are going to be amazed at the materials and anything Nancy she covers right on this website. So go ahead, look around on the website and come back because we're going to be talking a lot of Nancy Drew and referring to the website as we go along with our conversation. So, it says on the website that the website kind of began around the year 2000. Is that correct? Or
Yes. It was about that time that I started sort of forming what would become the website. At the time, it was like located in an old AOL homepage back when they did sort of those sorts of things before you kind of got your own domain. So that's kind of how about when I started it, and it's just kind of grown ever since. So I grew up reading them. So I was probably like 7 or 8 when I read my first Nancy Drew book.
What do you think really stands out about Nancy for fans? And then what do you think stands out about Nancy and her universe for you?
Well, I think what stands out about her so much is she's so bold and daring and so independent. And she's like this loyal, true friend that will help anybody in any situation, no matter how baffling the case. And so she's loyal, maybe to a fault, but she gets there in the end and she solves the mystery and saves the day. And she has exciting adventures along the way. And I think that's sort of inspiring. When you're a kid, you don't get to do these things. You don't get to, chase down dark alleys after suspects. Most kids don't anyhow. So you get to live vicariously through Nancy and the books, and it makes them so exciting. And so as a kid, it's motivating. You see Nancy can do it, maybe you can too. And, it carries with you into adulthood because, you have that nostalgia for what you read as a child. And so as far as I go, it started me collecting them and it started me researching behind the scenes and learning the history and, all of those fun things about Nancy. And so I think she just resonates with people as to who she is and her character. There is so many different things you could collect about Nancy Drew. It's kind of like a mystery into itself, trying to figure out everything you can find. But there's so many books and there's spinoffs. And then there's all these really neat collectibles and advertising ephemera. And, you could go on and on. I have several, I'd say 4,000 to 5,000 or more pieces. I kind of lost count at one time, but and a lot of it's displayed in shelves, the books, and then I have special areas where I put collectible items, and some are stored. But yeah, so it just keeps growing because there's always something new. And then, all the new merchandise, the games that come out every year, I add to the collection. So there's always something to find, whether it's vintage or modern. I think that's one thing I love about the games, in part, at least some of them, where they're based on an actual book, because it sort of brings the book alive, or at least some aspect of the book. And then, fans can read the book as well and cross over. If they discovered games first, they might cross over to books. Or if you were a book fan like myself, you cross over to the games. I like the first one, obviously, because you always like your first, perhaps. Secrets Can Kill, but Haunted Mansion, definitely. I also like Ghost Dogs of Moon Lake, which is sort of based on that ghost story book. One of the stories in it. I always thought that was really neat. And of course, I'm a classic Nancy Drew fan. So Shadow Ranch and Old Clock certainly are ones that I enjoy. I like the spookier type settings. And I think that's really genius the way you guys set up the games, because you can be Nancy. You're not seeing her, so each person can sort of become Nancy as they solve the mystery. And I think that's the genius of it.
And I loved reading on your website because I did see the picture. If you do go on Jennifer's website, you could see that she has a picture of her Nancy Drew script from the 2007 film, and it's signed by everybody, including Emma Roberts. And I didn't know you were a consultant on the film, which is really, sometimes that can be taken either way because they can ask you for as much advice as possible and they only use a little bit of it, or vice versa. So can you talk a little bit about how you were approached and what exactly they talked about and discussed with you to make the script as best as they could?
Sure. So what happened is the director, Andy Fleming, he was taking the script that Tiffany Paulson had written and sort of redoing parts of it. And he wanted somebody that knew Nancy Drew backward and forward, especially the classic Nancy Drew books. So someone at the production team had seen my website and just reached out to me. So it was sort of random, but I was so excited. But of course, Hollywood has their take on everything and they take liberties with this and that. So even though when I might suggest certain things, they didn't necessarily always listen to me. But I worked mostly with the director when he was doing the script. And so he would ask me questions about the classic books. He wanted to know what some of the favorites were and why, and which books had certain types of things in them. And I pointed him to some of the spookier books like Hidden Staircase and The Secret of the Old Attic, where, there's hidden rooms and secret passageways and things like that. So those ended up, getting incorporated into the film. Some of those classic Nancy Drew sort of foibles and villain sort of threats and things like that were staples of classic Nancy Drew. So I mainly worked with him. I would answer questions and give him some advice on the books. And then I got to visit the set for about 3 days when they were mostly filming on set at Warner Brothers Studios. And that was really neat because I got to see how a movie is made. You really have no idea till you're there on the set. So it was really fascinating. And then they rented or borrowed some of my books. There's a couple of us that are collectors that they borrowed books from, and they were used in the opening sequence of the film where you sort of see these shelves with all these books in them as it sort of segues into the beginning of the film. So that was kind of neat to have my books there. So what I had to see on set was when they were in the mansion in the film. And so Nancy was in her room, doing research on the computer. And then there was her and Ned and the little annoying sidekick, Corky, when they were discovering, there was a secret passageway. And then there was a scene with her father, Carson, where he was talking to her. And so he was on set in his robe and pajamas, and he had this T-shirt on that said River Heights Police Department. And it was kind of fun to see how they added those extra little effects even to the wardrobe. So I got to see some of those scenes. And then I got to see the shelves where they had all the books for that filming for that part. And so that's mainly what I saw. And then the costumer that did all the costumes for the film, he came in with a costume book and was showing me all these pictures and things of what they had taken of Emma in all her costumes. And so that was pretty neat to see sort of that aspect of it.
So what was it like to kind of talk to her? She was a rising star at that point.
Yeah, she was very nice. I spoke to her at least twice, and I was taking notes. I had a notebook with me because I was writing an article about my experience being there. So I was taking some notes, and she just kind of came over to me and was like, "What are you doing?" And I just explained, and she realized who I was then, that I was the consultant that had worked with Andy. And so she kind of talked to me a little bit about it. We didn't talk too long, but I had my script with me, so I asked her to sign it. And so that's when she signed it. And but anyhow, she was very nice, and she had someone with her that was on the set. I guess, I don't know if she was like a guardian or a tutor or somebody that was helping her do stuff. And so we didn't talk too long, but yeah, it was interesting to meet her and see her out of her Nancy Drew character element. So,
but what particular mystery out of all the books, out of the TV shows and the films and computer games, do you think is Nancy's perfect mystery?
Oh, goodness. Okay, so I think I would select from 3 books. The Secret of the Old Clock, The Hidden Staircase, and The Secret in the Old Attic, and I'll tell you why. The first one, because it's so iconic. It was the first one that introduced her, but you had all these different sort of elements to it. This missing will that Nancy's searching for, these heirs that need to be helped out. And you've got all these interesting elements of a spooky old secluded bungalow, getting locked in this closet by these robbers, and her escaping and locating the clock, and then it goes on and on. And that's such a kind of one of those fun sort of, lost heirloom, lost will type of mystery. But The Hidden Staircase has all of those sort of fun, gothic, spooky elements that so many love in a mystery. So you have, the hidden staircase and secret passageways and a spooky old, quote, haunted house and all the trappings of that sort of fabulous gothic mystery. And The Secret in the Old Attic is very similar, with a spooky house with a ghost or an intruder. And you've got this wardrobe with this skeleton in it. And then there's other elements of black widow spiders or tarantulas in the original. And you have this, just the whole setting of it is so suspenseful. And then the villains in the books, you've got the snooty Tophams in the first book, and the creepy Nathan Gomet in the second book. And then in The Secret of the Old Attic, you've got such a stylized villain in Bushy Trot. I mean, even the name Bushy Trot is so funny. But leaving her locked and bound in a room with a spider that's going to poison her, until she can escape. I mean, there's just so many fun elements. So I would name those three.
And I found on your website that you are writing a biography on Nancy Drew's first ghostwriter, Mildred Benson. You state that she has a fascinating life and that she is the real-life Nancy Drew. Can you talk a little bit more about her and about why you decided to pick her as a focus for your book?
Sure. Yeah, it's such a fascinating subject. And I feel like I'm trying to solve a Nancy Drew mystery in a way, and trying to research her life and put all the little puzzle pieces together, because there's so many fascinating elements. She was the first ghostwriter of Nancy Drew. She wrote 23 of the first 30 Nancy Drew books. And she began writing when she was in her early 20s, the books. So she kind of lived vicariously through Nancy, but Nancy sort of took things from Mildred as well. She had some really interesting adventures in her life, more in toward her middle age, actually. But she was a pilot. She flew her own plane. She made numerous trips down to Central America and scouting archaeological sites before they were ever open to the public, back when you had universities and people down there doing digs and sort of uncovering things in the jungle. And she would go down there and sometimes join these digs, or sometimes just hire a bush pilot and or natives to canoe her down a river to get to these sites. And it was so fascinating. And one time she got kidnapped and managed to escape. I mean, she had all these fascinating little adventures, just like Nancy Drew would. Some of those things about her, I guess, endeared me to her. And, I felt like I needed to tell her story, because even though she was so famously known for writing Nancy Drew, there's so much more to her life outside of Nancy Drew that's equally as fascinating and interesting. She was a journalist for most of her life, and in fact was still at work the day she passed away at age 96 in Toledo. She was working at the Toledo Blade that day on her column and went home sick and ended up passing away. But so she was a workaholic and very tough, tenacious, independent, and daring, just like Nancy Drew. And so I think that's one reason I was so fascinated with her. When I met her back in 2001 was when I first met her, and she passed away the year after that. So I got to know her briefly before she passed away, but I was definitely inspired and intrigued by her background and everything she had done, and learning more about her having written Nancy Drew, and not to mention many other series for the Syndicate and her own series that she did. So I was very intrigued by that. And that's sort of what got me started wanting to write a book about her.
Did she have her own Bess and George and Ned in that context of her own world?
That's an interesting question. Well, she had two husbands over part of her life, and then never remarried. I wouldn't say she really had her Bess and George. She was kind of different in her writing, even though she wrote for the Syndicate, and she sort of had to follow their dictates as far as characters and things that would go in the books, like Bess and George. When she was writing a lot of her own books, she typically had a heroine like Nancy Drew, where they would have maybe one little friend or sidekick that would help. But mostly her characters were very independent. And she was kind of like that in life. She was a very independent person. I wouldn't say she was a loner, but she wasn't someone that coveted lots of close friends. So
it sounds like the perfect book.
Well, I appreciate that. I hope it will be. I hope it'll be sort of the definitive biography on her, because recently I was given access to all of her personal papers and effects. And so that has just opened up a valhalla of research for me. So it seems like, I've been working on this for like 10 years, but I haven't been working on it solid because, I do a lot of other stuff with Nancy Drew. I consult. We have the Nancy Drew sleuths, the conventions, and all this other stuff that kind of distracts me. And then I would have research trips that I would take from time to time to different places around the country, especially New York, where they have the archive of syndicate material at the New York Public Library. So I would get a little bit of research here and there and gather it. And now I've pretty much got all my research. So I'm at the stage where I am sorting and cataloging all of that and writing and hoping to get it all sort of put together. But there's just been so many interesting puzzle pieces to her life and trying to sort them out and track down leads and little clues that I get. So I sometimes feel like I'm trying to solve a little mystery and putting together her life. I'm hoping to sort of dial back on some aspects of it in the next year just to get this done, because it's been a long time coming and it's time I get it finished and get it published. So I'm crossing my fingers it all comes together.
And speaking of that Nancy Drew convention, I heard that there is a special contest that is on its way for October. Is there any additional information that you'd like to discuss on this episode so we can tell our listeners to look forward to entering this contest?
Yes, I think it's going to be so much fun, because what we kind of do at our conventions is our mantra of sort of following in Nancy Drew's footsteps. And so what we like to do is pick a place around the United States or elsewhere that one of the books was actually set in. And so that's sort of what we're doing this fall. We've got the classic book, The Mystery of the Tolling Bell. And it's just so evocative of Maine that we're going to be in Maine. And so Her Interactive and Simon & Schuster and Nancy Drew Sleuths have put together this contest where we will send a lucky winner to our convention. And they'll have their airfare and their hotel and their registration and everything covered, and they'll get to come have an exciting adventure with the Nancy Drew Sleuths. And so we're very excited, and I think that one of the fans out there will be extra excited at this year because it's shaping up to be a really fun convention in Maine, and so we're all very excited.
So before we end our interview, I have 5 locked clues. We'll start with the first one. The first locked clue is your first Nancy Drew game.
The Secrets Can Kill.
Our second clue, what was your favorite Nancy Drew game from Her Interactive?
Oh, goodness. Haunted Mansion. I'll go with that one.
Our third one, who are you going to call? Ned Nickerson, the Hardy Boys, or Bess and George?
Bess and George.
Number 4, what place from one of Nancy's past cases from Her Interactive's games would you like to visit and see for yourself?
Well, I'm going to have to go with Crystal Skull. I have been there, but I would love to go again. Just the whole New Orleans, Louisiana connection is so fascinating to me, and I love it there. So.
And number 5, what character, besides Nancy and her friends, do you think you would get along with if you got to meet in person?
Well, I think it would be interesting, Sunny June.
Well, I can't thank you enough, Jennifer, for coming on the show. Again, listeners, please go ahead and check out Jennifer's website, and you can find it here at nancydrewsleuth.com. Again, listeners, you can go ahead and check out Jennifer's website at nancydrewsleuth.com. I know, Jennifer, you probably get tons of emails from other fans, so I'm going to send some more to you.
Well, I enjoy hearing from them, so that'll be exciting. Thank you.
And hopefully I'll see you in Maine soon.
Yes, I hope so. I hope it works out.